Okay, this is what you've all been waiting for. Senator Gloor, we're now ready to open the hearing on LB935. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good afternoon, Senator Avery. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Mike Gloor, G-L-O-O-R. It's nice to be back. I think it's been several years before I've been in front of this committee, well known within the legislature for its wisdom and impartiality. That's my Valentine for you for the day. I had nothing, I didn't have enough time to bake anything. I'd also like to state for the record that I'm a veteran, served from 72 to 76, and a longtime member of Legion Post 151. LB 935 would add a layer of justification, accountability, and transparency by establishing a legislative process that would have final authority over the proposed relocation from one jurisdiction to another of any state services estimated to cost $15 million or more. Exceptions would be allowed for the courts, the state colleges and university system, the legislature, and for constitutionally created officials and agencies. And as best I can determine, there are only two agencies that would fit that criteria: the Public Service Commission and the Department of Education. Missouri and other states have similar statutes to serve as a check and balance against capricious, excessive, or politically motivated largesse manifested through executive order affecting state services and sold under the veil of economic development. In fact, in Kansas, similar legislation of what I'm proposing is actually built into their state constitution. That's how strongly they feel about it. Moving a book of state business from one community to another is simply pouring water from one bucket into another with inevitable spillage, wastage, and ill feelings. One community's gain is another community's economic loss in an environment that will increasingly require our communities, especially in outstate Nebraska, to work together, not compete against each other in a taxpayer-funded gauge match. It's no secret that the impetus for LB 935 came from the proposed relocation of the Grand Island Veterans Home from its 127-year site in Grand Island to a new $121 million facility in Kearney. The controversial component of the bill makes the law, my bill that I'm proposing, makes the law retroactive to January 1st, 2013 to allow vetting of any qualified relocation project for which all funding is not in place or conditionally approved, in this case by the Department of Veterans Affairs, the National Department of Veterans Affairs. The VA passed on funding this project this calendar year. If there are questions of constitutionality, I have a handout citing case law that supports retroactivity, and I would hand that out now if the pages would pick it up and distribute it. Please, thank you. The handout also gives examples of other states that have similar legislative processes to the one I'm proposing to review proposals that include relocations, again, of state services and businesses. Please note, my bill does not seek to dispute the selection process, the scoring criteria, the scores. I've chosen not to involve you in a he said, she said dispute. I'm working to fix what I consider to be a flawed process. I'm looking to establish a good process. I seek to bring decisions like the Grand Island Veterans Home move into the light. The essence of the bill is sound policy, I believe, provides necessary oversight for a flawed process, and it's one where, in this past flawed process, there was no public input, especially from the veteran residents of the Grand Island Veterans Home. No predetermined standards aimed for in the applications. No supervision of the process. It's a flawed process that could, if it occurs again, undermine another community in the future and once again cause a permanent rift in relationships between otherwise good neighbors. Thank you for listening to this proposal, and I'd be glad to answer questions.
Thank you, Senator Gloor. Questions? Start with you, Senator Bloomfield.
Thank you, Senator Avery. Senator Gloor, is it fair to say that had Grand Island come out on top of that, we would not be seeing this bill?
I don't know that that's safe to say, Senator Bloomfield. It's an appropriate question to ask, but I would tell you that we began looking at this issue last year. As you'll recall, there was discussion about this and some head scratching about this and concern about this, not just from me, but other senators. It's the reason the Appropriations Committee asked for, as best we could give it through an appropriations bill, some degree of transparency. And so this was an issue that was on my radar screen last year. Now you're asking the obvious question, and that is, well, but if Grand Island would have come out ahead, would I have felt the same energy level to bring this forward? I think I would have, but I could understand if you'd say, well, maybe not. But I'd tell you, it didn't just become something we began looking at after the decision was made.
Okay. If you tell me that, Senator Gloor, I have no reason not to believe you. So thank you.
Senator Brandt?
Senator, thank you, Senator Avery. Senator Gloor, you said something in your own opening that kind of interested me, and I'm going to try and repeat it back to you to make sure I understand where you were going with it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you had suggested that passing your bill would help alleviate sort of, maybe the right word is politics from the process, insofar as the government and the governor and the process that he used. It could have been less political, I guess you could say. Is that a fair assumption, or is that a fair restatement of what you had stated?
It would have removed the suspicion, I think, and improved the transparency to hopefully remove, or if that was at work, minimize it by getting the legislature involved in the decision-making process. I can read you the quote if you'd like, but you're close, Senator Brandt, as usual.
Well, my thought is, if the stated goal is to get politics out of the process, your bill is adding 49 politicians into the process. That's the function of it. Do you think that perhaps your bill might undermine your stated objective?
Great question, and certainly one that I've thought through. You know, we go back to, I know you know part of this answer, but we are the representative branch of government. We are, just because of the way we operate, whether it's hearings like this, whether it's what we record and the reports that we get from our hearings to the full legislature, the different levels that we go through to advance a bill, we are far more transparent. Does that bring a degree of politics in? It certainly does. But I think all of us who have served as senators feel that that transparency from hearings all the way through the process helps minimize that, certainly helps minimize that. How can that not be helpful? The other thing I'd ask you to look at when you look at the bill is, I've laid out some criteria of the things that we should be looking at. And I did that specifically to address the concern you're bringing up, and that is, let's look at some key issues here that I think not only will improve people's attitude, but improve the process. As an example, one of the criteria I ask be addressed in this bill to the legislature is, what are the plans after you've moved this business out of this community? What are the plans to backfill? What are the plans to make sure that this isn't a win-lose? In Grand Island's place, there's a huge tract of land that the community gave to the state back in 1887, back when the Battle of the Little Bighorn was still recent news. I mean, amazing when you think about it that way. But the community bought it, gave it to the state to establish the first old soldier sailors' homes in the state of Nebraska. And there is no plan underway, and was no plan underway, to backfill, to do something with that land, to help fill in the loss of jobs. None of that was in place. I'm asking that be part of the process. I think that also will help tamp down some of the politics.
I hope you're right. As I've been thinking about your bill, the process that we do on an annual basis that concerns me, I think, is how we allocate state aid funds to schools in the TIOSA formula. And a term that I learned once I got into the legislature, the vertical and horizontal process by which we look at school districts, we find ours, and then go over to the side and see the impact of the state aid changes, and that pretty much determines whether we support or oppose the TIOSA changes. And I'm concerned that doing this is just adding another instance in which the state legislature is going to go through that, where basically we say, how does this impact our community? And that's how the public policy is determined, which isn't always the best way to make public policy.
Sure. And I would probably use as an example the fact that I'm sure the movement of the state fair to Grand Island will come up somewhere this afternoon. So let me be the first to bring it up. The legislature was involved in 2 rounds of hearings about the movement of the state fair. And there were plans underway. The university was quite active and involved, as was the Lincoln business community, on what will happen to that land when the state fair moves. So I would use that as an example of, with a higher degree of transparency, with discussion at the legislative level and elsewhere, there can be plans to backfill into the space that might be vacated, the jobs that might be lost. That would be one of my offsets to your concern about the politics.
Thank you, Senator Gloor.
Thank you.
Senator Scheer?
Thank you, Senator Avery. Senator Gloor, and I'm asking this just more for record purposes because of intent, and your bill talks of the $15 million impact, and I'm making sure that as we look intent, if this were to pass at some other point in time, what your intent meant is that a $15 million expenditure for the state. So for example, if it was a $50 million facility, but the state only had a $10 million obligation, this would not be part of it, or if it's anything, the total project is over 15 million, regardless if the state pays 500,000 of it. You know, where are you envisioning the $15 million impact to reside at?
I would think that the importance of this is such that it should be $15 million of total dollars that roll in. I mean, hypothetically, you could have somebody who feels strongly enough about this in another community that they want to donate half the amount to move that service. And so to me, it's the total dollars involved. And by the way, I came up with that number as a result of LB935, which was Senator Avery's bill. It came through this committee several years ago after the privatization initiative struggled so much in child welfare reform. And I think that bill started off with a $25 million number. And based upon feedback from Department of Administrative Services, they said, really, contracts, and it was for contracting, rarely get to that level. And I think as a result, it was amended down to 15 million. We kind of took our lead on this bill and the way it was structured and the dollar amounts from that bill that we previously passed. To me, it was a similar bill.
And would you be amenable, because I think too many times we put dollar amounts in legislation, they don't affect anything for a number of years, and then all of a sudden 10 or 15 years later, here's the amount, but on an inflation-based basis, it's way out of whack. Would you consider putting something in there that would adjust that amount, either from an inflation standpoint or whatever the case might be, or you prefer just to leave it at that number?
Absolutely, except there may be a constitutionality issue. I'm not sure what the legality of doing that or how we can do it in a way that allows us, but certainly, and your point's well made. I mean, 10 years, this may not come up for 10 years. And in 10 years, we hope inflation doesn't get this bad. But in 10 years, that 15 million may not be considered that large a sum of money. And so my intent was, again, as a look back to LB935, let's take a look at what DAS seemed to think was a reasonable amount based upon some of the contracting going on. So yes, I'd be amenable.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
Any other questions?